Hi kids, these are notes on feature news stories because we're gonna write some feature news stories. The first thing I want you to remember is that feature news stories are different from hard news stories in a lot of ways. They report on news, but they read a lot more like stories, like narratives. You may remember that they're not merely informative, they're also entertaining to read. Sometimes feature news stories are called soft news. You'll hear that term a lot. And I'm going to tell you here about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 7 different kinds of feature news stories. There are many more. Different people will give you different lists. But the feature news story you're going to write will be one of these kinds. So the first one is called a news feature. This one's really common. It gives facts like hard news, but it focuses on how people feel about an event. That's the angle. That's the main point of the news story. And when you were writing your hard news stories, I may have said to some of you, this sounds good, but it sounds like a feature news story because some of you were naturally sort of like drifting into the style of reporting the news from the point of view of how it affects people. So you're actually going to probably find this pretty easy. It's going to open like a story. It's not going to open with who and what. It's not an inverted pyramid style. It reads like a narrative. So for example, if you looked at the news today, whatever the top story was, there will usually be on the front page or maybe a little farther in a couple more stories on that same subject, but giving you the human aspect of it, like how people feel about that news event. And those would be news features. Another kind of feature news is an analysis. It's kind of like hard news. It's written with a more informative tone, but it's going to go sort of deeper into a topic, and it's going to try to answer the questions, why did this happen or how did this happen? You may remember that I said a lot of times hard news stories don't give the why or how because hard news is breaking news, right? Very recent news. And when something just happened, we usually don't know how and why it happened. So an analysis will often be about something that happened weeks ago, sometimes even months ago. So maybe a year from now, you'll see a feature news story in a newspaper or on a website that's an analysis of something that's happening today because the journalists have had time to try to answer the questions, why or how. An interview, this is pretty straightforward. An interview is when a reporter interviews someone. Now, what makes it an interview and not the type I'm going to tell you about in a moment is that when you read it on a website or in a newspaper, the questions and answers are printed word for word. On the page, it looks sort of like a play. A profile is a little bit like an interview, but the journalist will have done the interview and then written it up into sort of a story form with paragraphs. And it's going to give you everything you ever wanted to know about a person or about a place or about an event. So there could be a profile of a teacher at George Washington Middle School, or a profile of a restaurant in Ridgewood, or a profile of an annual Ridgewood parade. So it'll just tell you all the things that they're interesting to know about that person, place, or event. Another type of feature news story is a how-to. A how-to teaches a reader how to do something.
How to.
Step by step. A lot of times how-tos are like in the cooking section of a website or a magazine or a newspaper. A lot of those articles will be how-tos, like how to make a pizza your teen will love, right? And it'll like walk you through the steps of making the pizza.
But first you have to tell me this giant story of how it happened.
That's my son in the background here talking to me. Okay, a fact box. This is pretty easy. A lot of times you see fact boxes in the sports section. A fact box will be a simple list of, you guessed it, facts. If there are events that happened, they'll be in date order a lot of times. A lot of times they'll be bulleted. A vox pop is short for vox populi, which means voice of the people. And a vox pop is where a journalist goes up to several ordinary people and asks each one the same question. And then the Vox Pop reports each answer along with a picture of each person's face. You may not necessarily have seen a Vox Pop in a newspaper, because I know y'all don't read a lot of print newspapers, but Vox Pop is also a popular feature on the news and also on like evening talk shows. So if you look here, if you've ever seen one of these segments on a news show or in the evening in a nighttime, late night talk show, where a journalist goes up to different people and asks each one the same question and gives their answer, that's a Vox Pop. On the late night talk shows, it's done for fun, but when a news reporting journalist does it, it's done to give the reader or the viewer a sampling of what other people feel or think about a news event. A review, you've probably written one of these before. A review is an opinion about a car or a restaurant or a movie or some other product. Let me write or service. Products and services are two types of things that you can buy. And a review is going to give that person's, informed opinion about that thing that you can buy. Like you could read a review of, for example, a video game or a book review.